There are people who do not disappear from other people's lives all at once. They still show up. Still reply to messages. Still smile in conversations. But some part of them inside started stepping back a long time ago. What makes this kind of person hard to understand is most of them do not look sad. They still go to work. Still remember other people's birthdays. Still ask, "Are you okay today?" As if nothing is happening. But sometimes, the people who seem the most okay are the ones who have become too used to disappearing from their own emotions. There are people who once tried very hard to explain how they felt. Who once tried to say what hurt them. Who once tried to let someone see the softest part of them. But after enough times of feeling like they were too sensitive, too hard to understand, too emotional, they began to learn how to go silent faster. There are people who begin stepping back before things even truly get bad. The messages are still there. The conversation still continues. It is just that they no longer bring the truest part of themselves into it. As if some part inside them has quietly learned that. Do not wait until it hurts before disappearing. And the heartbreaking thing is, many people like this do not even realize they are slowly withdrawing. They only think, maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I just need a little quiet. But the truth is, some people have lived for too long with the feeling that they have to hold themselves together on their own. So long that even when they are loved, they still do not know how to relax. And what makes this kind of disappearing so hard to recognize is that it rarely begins with a clear departure. Usually, it begins in very small moments. A message answered later than usual. A "nothing's wrong" said too quickly. A person who once told you even the tiniest details of their day slowly begins to say only, "I'm fine." And that is all. Everything on the outside seems to keep going as usual. They still show up in conversations. Still sit beside you for a long time. Sometimes still smile softly like they always did. It is just that something inside them begins to close very gently. So gently that sometimes even they do not notice it themselves. There are people who once tried very hard to open up. Who once sat for a long time thinking about how to explain their feelings in a way someone else could understand. Who once edited the same message again and again just because they did not want to sound too sensitive. Who once hoped someone would truly notice that they were not okay. But then, after a few times of being interrupted while trying to speak, after a few times of gathering all their courage to be honest and receiving only silence in return, some part of them begins to get tired. Not the loud kind of tired, but the kind of tired that makes a person stop explaining. From that moment on, they begin to keep everything to themselves. The things that make them sad are processed late at night. The emotions they cannot quite name are pushed into some other corner of the day. And little by little, they become the kind of person who finds it very hard to bother anyone, even when they themselves are not okay. The saddest part is, many people like this still look completely normal from the outside. They still go to work. Still show up at gatherings. Still reply to a few necessary messages. It is just that no one knows there are nights when they lie there staring at the ceiling for a very long time, wanting to message someone about something. But in the end, they turn off the screen. Some emotions do not disappear. They simply stop being spoken. That is also why people who slowly disappear emotionally are often misunderstood. Other people see the silence and think they no longer care. They see the distance and assume they are cold. But some distance does not appear because love has run out. It appears because someone has gone too long without feeling safe enough to let another person see the truest part of them anymore. There are people who begin to speak less. Not because their heart is empty, but the opposite. Too much is happening inside them. So much that they do not know where to begin if they actually open their mouth. So in the end, they choose silence. At least silence feels less exhausting than trying to explain something very real. And watching the person in front of them slowly lose patience. From the outside, this kind of person is very hard to recognize. They still laugh at the right moments. Still remember what other people like to drink. Still notice when someone speaks less than usual today. Still ask, "Are you okay?" As if nothing has ever happened to them. It is just that. They almost no longer let anyone see the weakest part of them. There are nights when they open a chat with someone. Sit there watching the cursor blink for a very long time. Type a few lines. Pause. And then delete everything. Not because they do not want to be understood, but because a part of them has become too used to the feeling that the more honest they are, the easier it is to feel like they have become a burden. There are people who withdraw from a relationship long before they truly disappear. They begin to hold back their truest thoughts, their most vulnerable moments, even the things they once deeply wanted someone to see, until the distance between them and other people keeps growing. Very quietly. Very hard to notice. If you have ever been the kind of person who always says, "I'm okay," faster than your real emotions can speak, then perhaps you understand this feeling. The feeling of sitting in the middle of a conversation, still answering everything very normally, while one small sentence keeps repeating in your mind. If I truly say everything, will anyone still want to stay? And if any part of this video makes you feel as if someone has just spoken for an experience you never knew how to describe, leave a dot in the comments. Or share this video with someone who always says, "I'm fine," too quickly. Sometimes, what makes a person feel lighter is not advice. It is the moment they realize there are still people out there who understand that feeling. And maybe for the first time in a very long while, they stop feeling completely alone inside themselves. Because sometimes, being understood quietly heals parts of a person that explanations never could. And after a while, that silence no longer appears only in relationships anymore. It begins to appear inside them too. There are people who slowly no longer know what they are feeling. Not because they have no emotions, but because they have spent too many years trying to keep those emotions at a level other people could accept. They are used to swallowing their first reaction. Used to looking at the other person's face before saying something honest. Used to asking themselves, "Am I making everything too heavy?" And the sad thing is, many people do this for so long that it becomes a reflex. They begin to edit themselves very naturally. Edit the way they reply to messages. Edit the way they show sadness. Even edit the way they need someone. There are people who apologize too quickly, just because they feel they have created even a little discomfort in the air. There are people who are clearly sad, but when someone asks, "Are you okay?" they almost immediately smile softly and say, "It's nothing." Not because they want to lie, but because a part of them has become used to the idea that real emotions often make other people uncomfortable. And after enough times like that, they begin to disappear from their own emotions before they ever disappear from other people. The frightening thing is, this kind of person often does not look troubled at all. They are still very easy to talk to. Still remember other people's birthdays. Still answer, "Yeah, I'm okay," so quickly and naturally that no one thinks they need to ask again. Sometimes it simply looks like a person who almost never makes the atmosphere awkward. Always the one who says, "Whatever is fine." Always the one who gives up their part first. So easily that sometimes no one really asks what they want anymore. Until one day, they sit alone in their room for a very long time and realize they no longer know how to speak about their own feelings anymore. Not because there is nothing inside, but because too many things have been held back for too long. And perhaps the hardest thing to accept is, many people are not truly afraid of being alone. What exhausts them is the feeling of slowly no longer being chosen by someone. It rarely begins with a clear departure. Usually, it is only very small changes. A reply shorter than usual. A silence that lasts a few minutes longer. A very slight coldness in someone's voice that almost no one notices. But their body almost always notices it immediately. There are nights when they are so tired they do not want to think anymore. And yet their mind still returns to the smallest details on its own. A period at the end of a sentence. A reaction that feels slightly different. A feeling that is very hard to name. Something has just changed. And from that moment, everything begins to replay in their mind. Did the other person's voice sound colder then? Did I do something that made the atmosphere change? Or is this only the beginning of a kind of distance they have already experienced many times before? There are people who enter a relationship, but have never truly stepped out of a state of self-protection. They still love deeply. Still notice so much. Still remember very small things about the other person. But at the same time, a part of them is still silently preparing for the possibility of being left behind. And the most painful thing is, most of those reactions happen so quietly that no one sees them. No one sees the moment they reread a message for a very long time. Just because the period at the end feels somehow different from usual. No one sees the way their chest drops slightly when someone replies later than normal. No one sees the times they tell themselves, stop thinking about it, while their mind still cannot stop searching for signs that something is about to change. From the outside, everything still looks completely normal. But inside, they have almost never truly relaxed completely beside anyone. And if you are the kind of person who always senses the smallest changes in other people's emotions, so much that sometimes even you feel exhausted by yourself, leave a dot in the comments. Maybe you have lived in a state of having to stay alert for too long. So long that your body no longer knows what true safety is supposed to feel like. And after a while, this kind of person begins to feel tired even in relationships where nothing has actually happened. That is the part that becomes hardest for them to explain. The room is still as quiet as it always is. The other person is still lying beside them. The conversation still continues. It is just that, for some reason, a part of them still has not stopped being on guard. There are people who lie beside the person they love, but their mind is still quietly checking. Is there something different about them today? A silence that lasts slightly longer than usual. A reply that sounds less gentle than before. A glance that moves away too quickly. And that is enough for some part inside them to begin tightening. The most painful thing is, many people know very clearly that they are overthinking. They know the other person may simply be tired. They know not every silence means they are about to lose someone. But their body still does not react as if it is safe. They begin to pay attention even to the way they are sad. How sad can they be before the other person gets tired? How long can they stay silent before they are seen as cold? And how much can they need someone before they become too much? And then, over time, they begin to love as if they are trying to keep something from disappearing, instead of truly living inside it anymore. There are people who have never really relaxed in a relationship. Even in their happiest moments, there is still a part of them standing very far away, watching to see when everything will change. And then after many years, some people begin to get used to stepping back a little in every relationship. Speaking a little less. Needing a little less. Letting other people see them a little less clearly. Not because they have no needs, but because they have become too used to the feeling that every time they need something, the atmosphere begins to change. There are moments when they are clearly sad. But their first reaction is still always to smile softly and say, "I'm okay." So quickly that sometimes their real emotions have not even had time to appear yet. There are people who are very good at understanding other people's emotions. So good that sometimes they notice the other person is uncomfortable before that person even realizes it themselves. They often notice very quickly when someone starts to change. A conversation that no longer feels as natural as before. A gaze that lingers less than usual. A kind of silence that is very hard to explain. But their body always feels that something is not right. And yet the strange thing is, when someone asks them in return, "What about you?" they stand still for a long time, as if they have never thought about that question for themselves. There are people who have spent too long trying to become the easiest version of themselves to be around. So long that they begin to forget how they actually feel. There are messages they spend a very long time writing and still do not send. Not because the content is too serious. It is just that they are trying to make their emotions sound a little more comfortable. A little less heavy. A little less likely to make someone else want to pull away. And that is a kind of exhaustion that is very hard to see from the outside. Perhaps that is why many people feel the loneliest. Not when they are alone, but when they are beside other people. There are conversations that last for hours. Yet they still feel as if no one has truly reached the part inside them. They still laugh at the right moments. Still answer very normally. Still listen to other people's stories like they always do. But deep underneath, there is still a distance that is very hard to name. There are people who are very afraid of bothering others with their sadness. So afraid that even when they need to be held the most, they still say, "I'm fine." There are people who are always the listener. Always the understanding one. Always the one who knows what other people need. And then there are days when they suddenly realize they can no longer remember the last time someone truly sat down and asked, "How have you been lately?" That is not the kind of loneliness that is easy to see. It is just the feeling of being so used to always understanding other people that no one notices they sometimes need to be held onto too. There are moments when they tell themselves, "Stop thinking about it." But then, all it takes is for the other person to stay silent a little longer than usual. And all the familiar feelings return. A part of them immediately thinks, "Is something wrong?" And then sometimes, they meet someone who does not make them guess too much. A very quiet presence. Someone who does not force them to prove anything. Someone who does not make them feel like they are too much. And for the first time in a very long time, they realize their body no longer tightens every time the phone stays silent for a few extra minutes. But the strange thing is, that feeling sometimes makes them want to cry even more than pain does. Because they have never been used to that kind of peace. And perhaps that is what makes healing much harder than many people think. Not because they do not want peace, but because a part of them has never truly been familiar with that feeling. There are people who are in a very gentle relationship, but begin to feel even more insecure. No arguments. No clear sign that anything is getting worse. And that is exactly what makes it hard for them to breathe. Because they have lived for too long in a state of always preparing for something to happen. So when everything becomes too quiet, their mind begins searching for problems on its own. There are people who check their phone more on the days when everything is actually okay. Not because they want to control anyone, but because the silence leaves them not knowing where to place their feelings. And that is when many people begin to feel confused about themselves. Because being loved gently is supposed to make a person feel lighter. But sometimes, the thing that makes them the most tense is peace itself. So when someone does not make them anxious, does not make them guess, does not make them try so hard to hold the connection together, a part of them starts to feel like something is not normal. And that is the internal contradiction that makes so many people hate themselves. They say, Why do I still feel unsafe even though this person treats me so well? There are people who have become so used to loving in a state of tension that real peace makes them feel empty. And that is the ugliest part of emotional survival. Human beings often return to what is familiar before they return to what is good for them, even when what is familiar has hurt them deeply many times before. And perhaps what they have always been looking for is not someone who loves them a lot, but a very rare moment when beside someone they no longer have to silently prepare themselves to be left behind. Being beside someone without constantly asking themselves, "Am I making them bored?" is actually a very rare feeling for many people. There are people who have spent too many years trying to become the easiest version of themselves to love, so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to be loved without having to try. They only see a person who overthinks, a person who is a little sensitive, a person who easily goes quiet whenever something changes. But they do not see the battle happening behind all of that. They do not see the times this person forces themselves not to notice too much, while their heart still sinks because of one very small silence. They do not see the feeling of always having to keep themselves just enough, so they will not become a burden to other people. And perhaps that is why so many people begin to feel lighter the moment they realize they are not the only ones who live like this. That out there are still people who also reread old messages many times, who also feel their heart drop just because someone suddenly seems a little different, who also always say, "I'm okay," faster than their real emotions can speak. If throughout this video there has been any moment that made you feel as if someone was speaking out your own inner experience, leave a dot in the comments. You do not need to explain anything, just to remind yourself that there are feelings that are very hard to name, but you have never been the only one carrying them. Because sometimes what helps a person begin healing is not advice. It is the moment they finally hear someone say, "That feeling is real, and you are not crazy for feeling it."
Click the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. And be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you for being here. At Cortex Psychology, we explore the hidden patterns beneath human behavior, the thoughts you keep private, the emotions you cannot explain, and the quiet reactions that shape the way you live and connect. Sometimes, understanding yourself begins with hearing your inner world described clearly for the first time. So if this video helped you feel seen, stay with us. You do not have to decode your mind alone. We will decode it together. See you in the next one.